Hello and welcome back to Book Critique, a show where we talk about why my mom is kicking me out of her basement. My name is Imogen, and today we are going to discuss post-colonialism in Frankenstein. So before we get into this comparison between Frankenstein and post-colonialism, I kind of wanted to unpack what post-colonialism is. So post means after. Colonialism is when all those Europeans went around, settling all those places and creating colonies, and heavily shaped the way the rest of society has developed from then on out. So we live in a post-colonial world that was affected by that time period. So now let's get into Frankenstein. When you think of the word Frankenstein, a lot of people picture the monster, the creature himself, and not Victor Frankenstein. And there is a reason for that. It's because Hollywood kind of dwells more on the creation of the creature than on what happens after that, which is the majority of the book. Most of the films, actually all of the films, there really isn't a true adaptation of Shelley's work. And there are a lot of really heavy themes in her work that I think need to be discussed. As you might have guessed, one of them is post-colonialism. And I just want to kind of start with a disclaimer. I hate when people just kind of take their own ideas and their own politics and shove it into the work of, someone long ago who isn't alive anymore to defend what they were actually trying to say. And, you have author's intent and all of that. But I do have a quote of Shelley saying that she is talking about post-colonialism, which I will read to you right now. Through Victor Frankenstein, Mary Shelley says, "If this rule were always observed, if no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the tranquility of his domestic affections, Greece had not been enslaved, Caesar would have been spared his country, America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru had not been destroyed." So if we focus on the latter half of that quote, she's definitely talking about colonialism. She's talking about the fast-tracked way that, the colonizers just kind of took over the Americas, and the way that many of the natives' culture and histories were wiped out because of it. This reminds me of a quote from Cortez when he was taking over the city of Tenochtitlan. "Considering the inhabitants of the city were rebels, and that they discovered so strong a determination to defend themselves or perish, I inferred two things. First, that we should recover little of the wealth of which they had deprived us, and second, that they had given us occasion and compelled us to utterly exterminate them." And then later he goes on to say, "On this last consideration I dwelt with most feeling, and it weighed heavily upon my mind, leading me to think in a way I could strike them with dread, so that they should come to a knowledge of their error. And of the calamities we should bring upon them, with this view I continued to burn and demolish the towers of their idols and their houses." So basically, the history of these civilizations were completely wiped out in just anger and spite. Think about that. Similarly, when Victor Frankenstein was creating his creature, he wasn't thinking of the long-term repercussions. He was just acting out of curiosity. He was acting out of passion and fervor to create and to make his mark on history. And it had disastrous results.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
But the majority of Shelley's work goes beyond that initial creation. The creature himself is intelligent, empathetic, compassionate. He is watching people and desiring strongly to interact with them, to help them. He labors for them. But when he realizes society will never accept him anymore, that's when he kind of starts to become the monster that they initially think that he is. The creature says, "I longed to join them, but I dared not. I remember too well the treatment I had suffered the night before from the barbarous villagers." Despite all of the great qualities that the creature shows, everyone who comes into contact with him is just appalled by him and pushes him away. And this is where the idea of cognitive dissonance comes into play in this story. For those of you who don't know what cognitive dissonance is, a basic general summary is that it's when someone has a very firm belief in their mind, and it's so resolved to them that any outside information that they are presented with is turned away and makes them uncomfortable. So this is exactly what Victor Frankenstein experiences when, even after the creature explains to him his whole life story, that he's learned languages, that he's read and studied and done all of these things to show that he is a capable, potential member of society, Victor Frankenstein just rejects him immediately in hot anger. Victor Frankenstein said, Be gone, I will not hear you. There can be no community between you and me. We are enemies. So there was nothing that the creature could do to change his creator's mind. His creator viewed him as an abomination that could never be fit for society. So what does cognitive dissonance have to do with post-colonialism? Well, everything, to be honest. We can see the repercussions and the inequalities between races still present in society today, but some people refuse to acknowledge it. No matter how much information they are presented with, the financial inequalities, the educational inequalities, the healthcare inequalities, especially in America, that are between different races, they just shut all of that down and kind of blame the people that have been mistreated by society. So after Frankenstein tells his creator his story and explains, I want to fit in society, but society rejects me every step that I take, he makes a request. He says, I just want another like me. I don't want to be alone in this world. Just give me a wife. Which is a basic human request, to have a family. But Victor Frankenstein is afraid of that possibility. When considering the long-term repercussions of the creature having a family, Frankenstein says, even if they were to leave Europe and inhabit the deserts of the New World, yet one of the first results of those sympathies for which the demon thirsted would be children, and a race of devils would be propagated upon the earth, who might make the very existence of the species of man a condition precarious and full of terror. So Frankenstein's denying his creature's right to have a family is not historically unprecedented. When we think about American history, this is a very real thing that actually happened to people, horribly. The National Humanities Center says enslaved people could not legally marry in any American colony or state. Colonial and state laws considered them property and commodities, not legal persons who could enter into contracts, and marriage was and is very much a legal contract. That means that until 1865, when slavery ended in this country, the vast majority of African Americans could not legally marry. Families were destroyed. Children were taken away from their mothers. Parents were sent away. Grandparents were sent away. It's just their families were completely demolished. And it was completely inhumane. So we cannot deny that the history of this country is built on families that were torn apart. In the story of Frankenstein, after Victor denies the creature of being able to have a family, the creature goes back and strikes Frankenstein's family. He kills his wife and destroys his ability to have a future family. And after that, you just have these rifts between these two creatures, and for a long stretch of time, they're just at odds with each other and at war with each other. So the point that I'm making is we need to acknowledge the effects of colonization in the society that we see today. There are people that benefited from it, and there are people that were left at a disadvantage, and those equalities still aren't being met up. Similarly to Frankenstein, some people were treated like abominations. They were treated like they didn't belong in society, and they were treated like they were less than. And that affected everything. That affected the way that they view the world, the way that societies interact with them. There's all of these repercussions that happen from the way that people are treated. And that's a big part of what this story is about. When the creature was brought into this world, he loved humanity. He wanted to fit in. He wanted to find his place. He wanted to find his family. But he was deprived of a family. He was deprived of a home. And he was forced to live out in the wilderness in an uncomfortable life where he could not ever have the hope of fitting in and being accepted. Society kind of created the monster that they expected him to be. Similarly, we see these byproducts of colonialization in our society. There are people who do not feel like they fit in. They do not feel like they are welcome. They do not feel like they have the same rights as others. So unless we take accountability and make the steps that we need to make in order to learn and change, these divisions will not be overcome. Something needs to be done. Frankenstein needs love, just like I need love, but my mom is kicking me out of her basement. So for the sake of this puppy, I am once again asking you to like, comment, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.